Professor Ian Plimer is with us. How are you, sir?
Very well indeed, and good morning to you and your listeners.
And we are about the same age. Would you take exception to being told, not asked, told to go and have a driving test?
Well, like you, I drive fast cars, I drive old cars.
Yeah.
And I haven't had a dent in a car for probably 40 years. I haven't had a ticket for a very long period of time. I do probably 120,000 kilometres a year.
Wow.
I'm not in the habit of killing myself, but I do see people overtake me. I do see people driving very dangerously.
Taking risks.
Yeah. And city people, once they drive outback, they don't understand there's a big difference. You're driving fast. Sometimes you're on an unsealed road.
Yeah.
And as for 13-year-olds stealing my car, well, I have a very old Volvo rally car, and my security is to take out the distributor rotor.
It would go like the clappers.
It does, and no kid knows what a distributor is. And then it's manual. It's 4 on the floor with a heavy clutch. It's got no power steering and no power brakes.
Perfect.
So I think it's unstealable.
Yeah, it'd be tempting if they knew what it was capable of.
Well, yes, but it's very well emblazoned with logos and names on it. You know, my co-driver Doug Sprigg is there, and emblazoned on the side of the car, so it's pretty identifiable. It's not a white Camry, which would be hard to pick which one it was.
A report out of England says that 74% of people who have bought an electric car would not buy another one.
That's the story in the States also. And unless you're in a city and drive a couple of kilometres to do your shopping, they're absolutely, totally useless. They're very expensive. There's no resale value. No. And as you know, with your collection of ancient vehicles, they go up in value. It's one of the few investments where you don't pay capital gains tax.
Absolutely.
And so,
it's worth considering.
It certainly is. So listeners, if you've got a couple of spare shekels, look at an old car. I'm talking about plus.
If you had, if money was no object at all, what would be the car that would tempt you?
Oh, some of these Packards from the 1920s.
Oh, yeah.
Ugly as sin, but beautiful.
Heavy to drive.
Oh, yes, yeah. Well, one of the cars
have
I
a
drive
chauffeur.
is a very heavy car to drive. So,
yeah.
And I know when I go on rallies in this old Volvo, 60-year-old Volvo, it's like having a workout. The clutch, I've got a very, very heavy clutch. Yeah. I've got no power steering, no power brakes. No. And at the end of the day, your shoulders are sore and your legs are sore.
Yeah.
But the pedals are beautiful. Some of the older listeners will know what a heel and toe is.
Yes.
And so you can change down very quickly. So you're braking hard, you're changing down, coming into a corner of an unsealed road. And that's quite exciting because sometimes you're not on the unsealed road. You're doing a bit of ploughing.
I wonder if you had younger people driving old cars, if they'd know what how to double declutch.
They wouldn't. And I taught my kids and I taught my grandson how to double declutch. I taught them also how to drive if the brakes fail, how to use the gearbox.
Yep.
And my grandson's got a Toyota Land Cruiser and they have a habit of stretching the clutch cable, and you can't change down. So I taught him how to change gears without the clutch.
Yeah,
and
because you can time them, can't you?
Oh, yes,
you can time the speed and the.
His parents wouldn't teach him to drive. They just went berserk, as most parents do, trying to teach their kids to drive. But I took him driving. I managed to get him bogged out back, which was terrific. Yeah. But we did quite a bit of night driving out back, but I just couldn't get him to hit a kangaroo or any stock because I trained him so well. So that was my great disappointment because you have to know that if you're going to hit something, you hit it. You line it up square, you brake like anything and line it up square on and hit it. If you swing the wheel, you're going to turn the vehicle over, especially on a dirt road. So it was a great bonding to teach him how to drive and to teach him how to drive without a clutch and to teach him how to drive without brakes. And it was good fun.
Yeah, it was a life-saving measure for him because that sort of knowledge is worth.
Well, I think when our generation goes, that's it.
Yeah.
Because all kids now learn on automatic cars.
Yes, I know.
And so they can't drive things. So, occasionally you might have to drive a truck or a tractor or... in an emergency, you might have to drive a manual car. Well, if you can't do it, it makes life very tough.
The Triumph, I had one once, a Triumph TR4.
Lovely car. I hope it was British Racing Green.
No, it was red.
Oh, testosterone red.
It was red. But they, to my great surprise, have a tractor engine in them.
Oh, wow.
It's actually a tractor engine.
Yeah.
And you think to yourself, God, it's not a sports car with a tractor engine, but it really did go extremely well.
Yes.
No, it was beautiful. Dr. Addy Paterson, and I came across this, I think, from memory, because people send me all sorts of things from all sorts of places. I think it came from Sky News.
I did see him on Sky. He's a former chief executive of ANSTO, which is a nuclear power facility in Sydney.
Yeah.
And he was trained on the South African nuclear facilities. Yeah. And they have a centre just out of Cape Town.
Obviously, he was not saying the things that the ABC wanted him to say because they censored it and never, ever ran it.
Of course not.
Which seems to me to be so bizarre, because just because somebody is not going to say what you want him to say, that's no reason to ban something, because it's another point of view, which you should not only respect.
It was about diversity of politics, diversity of opinion.
Only if you're agreeing with them.
Well, yes. Yes, and maybe if you're a black lesbian with blue hair, you'll get an airing on the ABC. And the fact that you might be brain dead has nothing to do with it.
No, absolutely not. Let me play this for everyone. You may have heard this. This may be the interview that you heard.
I saw it on Sky.
Well, he's done several things on Sky. You want to press the button, Tony?
As we've been telling you, Peter Dutton announcing he's going to go to the next election, promising to build these 7 nuclear power sites. He says they should be operational by 2035 and 2037. Dr. Addy Paterson, the CEO, or was the CEO of the Australian Nuclear Science and Technology Organisation, which operated Australia's research reactor at Lucas Heights, joins us now. Hi there, Doctor.
Hi, good morning.
Great to chat to you. What was your first reaction to this policy that the opposition leaders just outlined?
Well, I've literally just got it in front of me, and I've seen the press releases, and it's just literally still warm because it's come off my my printer just down the corridor. Obviously, there's been some stuff that's come out around what its objectives are and so on. My first reaction is, and has always been my position, why are we, as a modern democracy, banning things at the federal and in a number of the states of our nation when low carbon nuclear electricity provides the cheapest to consumer costs and would transform our electricity grid, which is getting longer, more dilute and less reliable, and is getting very, very expensive.
It's interesting, though, that the CSIRO GenCost study said that nuclear power would be 3 times as expensive as solar and wind. Do you disagree with that?
Well, that's not what the GenCost report says. Remember, GenCost means the cost of generation, and the CSIRO has got no expertise in the cost of generation. And what they do is they take publicly available figures of the construction costs of nuclear power plants, usually in countries that have got regulatory environments that are kind of designed to stop nuclear. They take those costs and then they convert them into a generation cost using an algorithm which is provided to them by a private sector firm that is not an expert in nuclear industry. It's a GenCost report. I call it the GenCon report. There's no reliability. I've engaged the CSIR for a number of years, both directly and also through the press, to say we can work together to sort this out, but they've got no inclination to do it.
That's certainly interesting.
It's absolutely fundamentally true. And because GenCost is then seized by people in the media as an authoritative thing about what it means for consumers, let me give you one example. The Finnish plant that was switched on about a year ago was over budget, and it also took too long to build. When they switched it on, the cost of electricity for Finnish people went down to 1/3 of what it is today. My message to the public of Australia, you are being conned, because the cost of electricity is based on reliable, always-on supply. Wind is only available on average 2 days out of 5, 40% capacity factor. Nuclear power plants globally generate more than 93% capacity factor. Reliable, always-on, low-carbon electricity is the best ecological objective. We would stop ripping through the hills of Queensland with horrible new wind turbines. It's absolutely an abuse of our environmental heritage to put wind turbines through 150 kilometres along the ridges in Queensland.
So are you saying that it might be more expensive initially to actually build them, but once they're up and going, the overall costs will be cheaper?
I'm not saying that. That's what the International Energy Agency says.
Gotcha.
These are publicly available figures. And the debate has been wedged by a failure of the parties. So, I'm non-partisan. I've never been a member of a political party ever. I decided that I have to be, free oxygen in the air that the people of Australia breathe, not the heady houses in Canberra. And it's fundamentally important for the people of Australia to know that it is an absolute con to suggest that if we had nuclear electricity that it would be more expensive. I was shocked and appalled by the recent advertising from the current Labor Party of cooling towers, which people think are nuclear, but they're just cooling towers used with all forms of nuclear energy that is thermally based, superimposed with the trefoil above the Sydney Opera House. This type of scare campaign, this dystopian, ancient, fear-based campaign does not belong in a rational, modern, liberal democracy.
I guess other people...
Bans should be lifted.
Right. So there's the next question I have for you. At the moment, we have a ban on nuclear industry in this country, on nuclear power. That came in, I believe, in the John Howard era. How easy would it actually be to overturn that? Is that something that could happen if the coalition isn't supported by the other members of Parliament?
Well, look, two things. That ban, the federal ban, was 6 or 7 senators sitting in a room after midnight, slipping something into a bill that had to go through for other reasons, and that was the basis of the ban. There are also bans in Queensland. There's bans in New South Wales and so on. So it's not just a federal issue. My call is to every senior politician in Australia to read what I'm reading just as I speak to you, the coalition's policy. The first thing is it looks really complicated. Let's just lift the bans. That's step one, to get everybody, every person of goodwill on every side of politics, including the Greens who support nuclear, and I applaud all of those that I've met and talked to in small rooms. And let's get the bans lifted, because if we lift the bans, a lot of other things become possible. The discourse becomes less dystopian, the fear is taken out of it, and it becomes an economic and rational choice. The other thing that people don't know, to build all of the solar panels and wind turbines, we are going to have to double the size of the grid. Your electricity bill, my electricity bill, 40% of that bill is the grid. What happens when we've doubled the size of the grid? People are worrying about the cost of, the capital cost of a nuclear power plant. Nobody's talking about the capital cost of doubling the size of the eastern grid. The eastern grid in Australia is the most complex machine in the southern hemisphere. The policy of this government is to make it twice as big as it is, and twice as complex, frankly, if you have to integrate intermittent sources into it. So, every time the sun goes down, solar panels go to sleep. Emergency services, sewage pumping, landing aircraft, all of these things happen at night. Smelting aluminium happens at night. How do people believe that we can create a grid that's double the size, lower energy density, and have the quality of life we currently have? This policy is based on a failure to get proper engineers in the room. I mean, engineers are being banned from giving talks as we speak.
There's another element I do want to talk to you about on this, and this is the timing, how quickly we could do this. Obviously, we have targets that we've signed up to in the Paris Agreement, and particularly, net zero by 2050. Is it really possible to get these built the coalition's hoping by 2035. Is that possible, considering if we look overseas in Europe and North America, they are years behind schedule and they're over budget, I should say. Do you think we can do it on time?
You're not an expert and you're over-summarising.
Okay, fair enough, yeah.
A really good example is the Emirates. Okay.
Well, I did say Europe and North America because I know the UAE is different.
Sorry, but UAE is not different. UAE negotiated with all of its partners internationally to establish what is called the gold standard. This is often obscured in these debates because they wanted to be able to build Korean plants with an independent group of international regulators overseeing their new regulator so that they would do it to the highest international standards. Their first plant, I think, took 7.5 years. If you take it from first concrete to first electrons on the grid. The last one, I think, took 5.5 years. What we're talking about here is wanting to do something and setting up the regulatory framework. Our PANSA is a fantastic regulator. And our PANSA with extra capacity, working with the gold standard set for UAE, the Korean plants already have a supply chain. We don't have to develop a supply chain. If we take the AP1000, the ones in Georgia took a long time to build. But as I say, when they switch them on, the cost of electricity goes down. And the public of Australia needs to understand that with nuclear in our grid, the grid will be half the size. All of those easements, all of those poles and wires going past your house and out across the hills and fields, 185 kilometres of wind turbines over pristine forests in Queensland will not be necessary. And we can do it in 10 to 12 years if there is shared intent by shared political actors acting in the best interests of Australians. It is time to change it. Nuclear for Australia, led by Will Shackle, I'm his chair. We're going up to Anstow today to talk more about this. Young people, Will Shackle's leading this charge, have transformed the debate. A vast majority of people under 25 support nuclear power or think that it's not a problem in their lives. Around 70%.
I guess if I summarise a little bit of what you were saying there is you do think it's possible. And
absolutely.
Yeah, we're getting...
Absolutely.
Okay, we are going to have to...
Yeah. It's definitely not too expensive. So that is the old mantra that was used to get the bans in place based on fear and irrational hatred of nuclear. We've got to grow up.
Dr. Paterson, I'm afraid we do have to wrap up there, but I am taking all your points on board. You say it's not too expensive and that we can do it on time, and that perhaps, in your opinion, some of the science that we're being told, be it through the media or through the CSIRO,
is not my opinion. It's global expertise of people who know about nuclear power and electricity, and I am one of them.
You certainly are one of those, and I appreciate your time today very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Addy Paterson there, the CEO of the Australian Nuclear, was the CEO of the Australian Nuclear Science and Technology Organisation, which was operating Australia's research reactor at Lucas Heights.
Was that the one you heard, Professor?
No, that wasn't the interview I heard because that was ABC. I heard it on the Outsiders on Sky, and Sky is the Outsiders is probably the best program you can ever watch on television. And it was interesting because she was an uninformed, ignorant ideologue talking over him. And he's an international expert and giving an expert opinion.
And she doesn't have to summarise what he says. He says it quite eloquently and explicitly.
Very clear cut. And she was trying to denigrate this as, it's just opinion. And it was impressive that he didn't allow himself to be talked down to or talked over.
Yes.
And he was giving facts. And she couldn't handle it because the ABC is an ideological organisation. They have political positions on many, many points, and they don't actually allow alternative opinions. And I'm surprised that they interviewed him.
But isn't there a charter? But they didn't run it on air, by the way. That never got to air.
Oh, I wasn't aware of that.
No, never got to air.
Oh, well, of course.
It never got to air. It was picked up somehow. Sky got hold of it, and they used it, and somebody sent it from Sky to me.
Okay. Well, he then did a Sky interview in the studio.
Yes, I think he's been
Sunday morning.
Yeah.
And he did make a very important point, one which I had missed, and that was that the bulk of electricity in Sydney and other cities is backed up by rooftop solar from people's homes. And he pointed out that that at many times produces, I think he said 53% of the energy for the grid. Now, if we have a massive hailstorm, that's all gone. It's completely out of the equation. And he says that there is a huge risk in the Sydney Basin of completely losing power.
It's happened before. They've had terrible storms.
Before. And this is the problem I have with our ideological Greens, is they don't look at the past. Now, I look at the geological past. I'm also very interested in history and also have a bit of an interest in these subjects. And you look and say, have we had a day hotter than this before? Have we had a massive hailstorm before? Have we had floods before? Have we had bushfires before? And in every case, we've had these catastrophes before, and they've been bigger than the ones we're currently experiencing. So the poor old ABC, with our money, are not operating within their charter, and they're not informing people. They are a green collective run by the staff, not run by a board, and boards run companies. Boards, the board should actually jump on the ABC, but they don't.
Yeah. I'm just trying to remember the name of the the chairman the general manager or chairman?
Williams? Kim Williams?
No, he's the new one. Kim Williams is the new one. John Howard appointed him.
Scott, who's now
that was after
Vice Chancellor of Sydney University, and he's making a total mess of that also.
It's interesting.
These people get promoted beyond their level of competence, and if you stuff up, you get a promotion.
Yeah, well, this bloke...
probably why I'm such a miserable, mean little critter. I haven't had massive stuff-ups and haven't been promoted to my level of incompetence.
Now, this bloke cried when he left. He resigned, and he actually was in tears. I can't think of his name. But
he's on a good wicket.
Well, when he left, he cried. He just said, "I'm sorry, the animals have taken over the zoo."
Yes.
So there was no point in having him as general manager because there's nothing he could do. It was like sitting up in the wheelhouse, spinning the wheel, but they've disconnected.
Well, Morris Newman says the same thing. I know him quite well and occasionally have these discussions, and he basically was not able to do anything. Yes. Janet Albrechtsen was also on the board. She was not able to do anything. Now,
I think Michael Kroger was on the board too.
Michael Kroger was also, and boards have to be able to exercise power, because if there's litigation floating around, you as a board member get hit with litigation.
Yes.
Now, there are directors and officers insurance that most companies have, but there are certain areas where you are not covered. So boards run companies, and the ABC don't seem to realise this. The CEO reports to the board. The CEO doesn't run the show.
Yeah. Les, you going to butt in?
Just sorry to interrupt. Just as a stop press, I just checked the national electricity market. At the moment, New South Wales, around about 50% black coal is where the power is coming from, about 25% rooftop and 25% large solar. So, as Professor Plimer says, if there's a major hailstorm or the sun doesn't shine or there's significant cloud cover, we have to revert to black coal. I mean, it's just part of the energy mix.
Well, what is wrong?
The diet.
What
the
is
diet
wrong?
we need.
What is wrong with black coal?
Well, you ask Chris Bowen and Anthony Albanese, those two zealots who think that they know everything and can't debate Peter Dutton on the real data.
Yeah, well
we've been fed a lot of Mickeys over time, and one of them is about emissions from burning coal. Now, when we burn coal, we produce heat, and we run a steam engine, in effect, to spin a turbine to create electrons. So that process was once a dirty process, but we've been able to filter out in baghouses the fine particulates. We've been able to filter out the fly ash, and we've been able to chemically take out some of the nitrogen compounds. And what we release to the atmosphere is water vapour, which you see from coming the top of the cooling tower.
And they try to pretend that's pollution.
Of course they do.
Yeah, that's pollution. It's water vapour, I know.
And it emits carbon dioxide. Now, that carbon dioxide was once in the atmosphere. It was sequestered by plants into coals, and we're now putting it back where it came from. And this is plant food. And I cannot, for the life of me, understand why we should be stopping putting plant food into the atmosphere, because in the long term, for the last 500 million years, we have decreased the atmospheric carbon dioxide content from 0.7% to 0.04%. We're actually in a carbon dioxide crisis. Not that we're emitting it, there just isn't enough for plant life.
Why aren't these
inevitable glaciation?
Professor,
we'll suck it up.
Why aren't these people why are they allowed to blunder along with these kind of Stone Age views? Hypocrites as well, because here we are, we can't use the coal. It's an evil thing, but we will sell it to the Chinese and the Indians. Like, they're not going to burn it, they're not going to use it,
That's right.
or they're going to do it in a different atmosphere that won't affect us.
Well, we now have these high energy, low emissions generators where we burn coal at very high temperature, and they are incredibly efficient. I see that we have totally been affected by the Kool-Aid on this, and people are now of the view that carbon dioxide is a dangerous compound.
Yes, even though Australia's emissions are so low, 1% or 1.2% or something.
Our emissions are 1.3% of the global emissions, which are 3%. So basically our emissions are 9 parts of 3/5 of bugger all.
But why can't we get these people to understand that?
Because as soon as people like me bring up an alternative argument, they attack me, the person. I'm well known for eating babies and shooting cows and things like this, and so they attack my personality. They don't discuss the evidence, firstly because they can't, because they're scientifically ignorant, and that Dr. Paterson interview showed that lady was absolutely pig ignorant. And the second thing is that the mantra of the left is that we are destroying the planet. Now look at what wind turbines do. Look at what solar does. That's destroying the planet. It's just not carbon dioxide. It helps plants grow.
I don't know, John, are you there?
I am, Jeremy.
I'm with Professor Plimer. What would you like to say?
Well, I want to just mention, were you aware that on the ABC yesterday, they interviewed students from Brighton High School, year 11 and 12, with about Peter Dutton's view on using nuclear power.
No, I didn't hear that. What was the gist of it?
Well, the gist of it was that a couple of the kids were quite prepared to accept the fact that we're going to go to nuclear, and a couple of them were very wary of it. They said, we'd like to have more information, and thinking that these students are potentially voters of the future. And I reckon that's one of the reasons why they've gone out. But I'd like to know how many other schools throughout Australia are being hit with this same question.
Well, I think the ABC tried to get school kids to all object to it and was surprised that they'd misread the room. The second thing is that the chap that Dr. Paterson mentioned, Will Shackle, is a young bloke. I think he's about 18 or 19. And he is a wonderful advocate of nuclear. He is very articulate. He's very presentable. Oh, it actually looks a bit of a dag, and that's really what you want. So I think they've misread the room, and I think Mr. Dutton's announcement was actually reading the room, and that is that the young people now see that there is no alternative. And the Greens in Germany have realised that. Green parties elsewhere in the world have realised this, that there is no alternative. If you want to stop putting carbon dioxide or plant food back into the atmosphere, you must have nuclear to run an industrial economy. And we, as a G20 country, will export huge amounts of yellow cake, yet we don't use it. This is just nuts. We are the only G20 country without nuclear power stations. We have 60 of them being built at present. Places like Bangladesh are building a nuclear power station. Spain has the same number of nuclear power stations that Mr. Dutton is proposing for Australia, and we hear this ridiculous mantra that we do not have the skills to run nuclear power. Well, Dr. Paterson has the skills. We have had a nuclear reactor in Sydney for more than 60 years. That's generating medical isotopes. We do have the skills to do it. The real fear is that we are having kids now not doing physics at school, which translates to kids not doing a physics degree, which means that we won't have people in the next generation with the training in physics to be involved in the generation of nuclear power. And that is the concern, but it's a long-term concern. And we're now, as Dr. Paterson mentioned, we're now at the stage where you can buy a design off the shelf, be it Korean, be it Japanese, be it Canadian, be it a US design or French design. You can buy them off the shelf. That saves years.
Rolls-Royce make one, don't they?
Yes. Oh, they're the modular reactors. So the suggestion is the modular reactors at Collie and Port Augusta, and the other 5 are big reactors. Now, if you have the same design for a big reactor rather than having 5 different designs, you immediately speed up the process and lower your costs. And Dr. Paterson is quite correct. The best example is Finland, which was a green country. They've realised the inevitable. They have got nuclear. It's massively lowered their electricity costs. And if the listeners want to keep paying very, very high electricity costs, then go for unreliable wind and solar. And the wind and solar industry is going absolutely apoplectic at present. And they're sending out SOS messages. And the SOS is save our subsidies because they're very much aware that a nuclear industry will wipe out inefficient, unreliable energy systems where they're making a killing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why philosophically would the government be so wedded to alternatives?
Because they think there are votes in it. And there is the doctor's wife vote, and they're mainly in teal seats. They think there's votes in it. And I think the electorate is being treated poorly. The electorate is very much aware that their electricity prices have gone up. They're very much aware that the more you put in solar and wind with the 13,200 kilometres of new grid you've got to put in, someone's got to pay for it. And you pay for it with your electricity bill. And
well, as the doctor said, I mean, they're planning, their philosophy is basically to double the size of the grid.
Well,
who's going to pay for that?
Well, you will with your electricity costs. And the second thing is that farmers, and I've seen potato farmers in between Ballarat and Hepburn Springs that have got a power line that's going to go across the area. They now have to abandon their farming because they can't use machinery under the grids. The Country Fire, the CFA in Victoria is saying, well, look, if we get a fire from a wind or solar plant, we're not putting it out. So there are some realities out there, and I think the public is aware of it, and the public is being treated poorly, and the government doesn't seem to have learnt from the no vote, and the government doesn't seem to have learnt that when there's a popular opinion, it's generally 60-40, and they're now in the position where they've totally misread the room.
Yep. John, do you know any doctors' wives?
Oh, no, I don't, Jeremy.
Why? I wonder why doctors' wives have this reputation for being, stubborn or dumb or ideologically fixated.
Well, not my doctor's wife.
No.
I go to dinner with her and her husband. He has different music tastes to me, so whenever I'm in Melbourne, I take her to the opera.
So some of them are all right.
Well, she's Irish. I think that probably helps.
What else do you want to say, John?
The other point I want to raise is our $85 a quarter increase in water in South Australia. Look, I tell you, the Premier promised no extra taxes. Well, if that $85 is not an extra tax, I'd like to know what it is. He say it's for the infrastructure for the 600 homes they want to build. Now, I heard on another station, I heard that a gentleman came on, he said he'd worked for ENWS for 30-odd years.
Yeah.
He said the infrastructure is there. He said someone hasn't looked at the plans properly.
Yeah. Or planning should have been organised years and years and years ago. I don't know if there's a master plan for things like infrastructure and water and all of the other things if you're going to grow your city.
Well, you also build overcapacity. So the overcapacity is built into the system. For example, when Warragamba Dam was put in about, I think, 1961, it came on stream. Sydney had a couple of million people in it. It's now got 5.5 million. Yeah. But that was over-designed. So with all infrastructure, you over-design it.
Yeah, but even as the over-design, it was inadequate because...
Well, in some cases, in some infrastructure, it isn't. For example, the sewage system in London was Victorian in age, and it is still coping with London.
Yeah.
So that is, I think, an engineering principle. You over-design.
Yeah.
But apparently it hasn't happened with our water. And I have a personal objection to paying for people developing their own land. Yeah. Why should I pay for it? Why should I pay the extra $85?
Well, you shouldn't.
I'd like to just make one other point, and then I'll leave you gentlemen to yourselves. Sarah Ferguson, ABC commentator, I believe you were discussing her just prior to me joining you. She was interviewing a lady from America over the Julian Assange saga.
Yes.
And Sarah wanted to get into the debate that's going to be with Joe Biden and Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And this American lady, she put her straight back in her place. She said, I thought you invited me here to discuss Julia Assange.
She was a no-nonsense lady, all right?
Oh,
I saw it, yeah.
Yeah. All right. I'll go, gentlemen. Thank you, and have a good day.
No,
Thank you.
Did it well. Thank you, John. You mentioned the sewer system in London. You know, something that amazes me is that the Great Ormond Street Hospital, St Mary's, I don't know if they were built in the 1700s or something like that, but they don't want to tear down their hospitals and build new ones. These are old hospitals, but they move with the times. Beautiful old buildings, still functioning, supplying society with what they have been doing for hundreds of years.
Yes, well, and we know from building a hospital here in South Australia, they come in way over budget, far too late, and often they're not fit for purpose.
Yep. And yet if you persevered with the old one and you just maintained it, and you just kept on updating it, that would be a far, far better thing to do.
Except as a politician, you need a memorial to yourself.
And they like going out there cutting the ribbons and all the rest of it.
Yes, you've got to do that.
Yeah. Well, if you're the Governor-General, there's a lot of ribbon cutting in being a Governor-General.
Well, you have to do a hell of a lot with the Governor-General's salary. Over 700,000, that's millions of ribbons you've got to cut.
My God, yes. There's a lot of, what do they do? What do Governors-General do? I mean, it's a ceremonial job, and we were talking about it earlier. It really should be an honorary thing, shouldn't it? A great honour to be the Governor-General.
I've been to some wonderful functions at Government House when Peter Cosgrave was the Governor-General.
Yeah.
And there's delightful food, all sorts of alcoholic beverages you want.
Yes.
When he was the Governor-General, he was
great. I liked him.
And you could have a conversation on any subject with him.
Yep.
And I do recall that on one occasion he had done his homework.
Yes.
So it could be, for the right person, a very stimulating job. And I thought he did a wonderful job.
Yep.
I'm yet to see what the new Governor-General will do and how she will do it.
How do you do that job if you're a Republican? You take a job that is completely diametrically opposed to your personal philosophy about the monarchy? It seems a bit hypocritical, doesn't it?
Well, of course it is. And then, of course, you get an AC. Governors-General get ACs. Yeah. You have hot and cold running maids. You have two houses, one on the waterfront in Sydney and one in Canberra, which is
Pension for life.
with wonderful grounds. You have drivers, you have cooks, you have butlers.
Yeah. Very socialist, isn't it?
It's an enormous sacrifice that you have to make for your Republican principles. But someone's got to do it. So as a Republican, you do it.
Yeah. I remember talking about Peter Cosgrove. We'd had him on the air. I'm not sure what he was doing at the time. He was about to retire or something like that, but we had interviewed him, 2 or 3 times over the years for one thing or another. He's wonderfully good on his feet. As you say, he could talk on any subject you like. And we had John Howard, who was, maybe it was an election coming up or something, brought him to town, and he had come into the studio. And he was having a cup of tea and he was sitting there. And he said, on air, he said, you just had Peter Cosgrove on. I said, yes. Wouldn't he make a wonderful Governor-General? And he looked at me, John Howard looked at me.
He was checking the breeze.
No, I think he had made the decision.
Oh, yes.
It was done, but he wasn't going to comment on it.
Well, I think the same situation with Mr. Dutton and nuclear. I was at a lunch with him mid-last year, sitting next to him, and the first question was asking me about nuclear. Then I was at a function with him, again sitting next to him earlier this year. First question was about nuclear. It had been on his mind for quite a while, and he'd be doing his homework, and every person, especially scientists that he met, he would discuss the matter with. So I think that shows that this is not a knee-jerk policy. This is a policy that's been well thought out.
Yes.
And as for the argument about costing, We've never heard what the real costs are of solar and wind and putting in 13,200 kilometres of new grid by destroying all this wonderful farmland. What is the long-term cost of that?
Crazy. It's crazy.
So, and then they claim that there's environmental problems with nuclear. What about destruction of rainforest in Queensland? What about having these turbines out to sea, destroying the wildlife? What about the birds and the bats onshore that are killed? And on it goes. So we've never had an honest discussion. This has just been dropped on us. And I'm not so sure that when people voted for governments in the past, they were aware that they were going to put up their electricity costs. And both sides of Parliament are to blame for this. They both have gone down the green path without discussion, without logic, and without getting expert opinion. And we heard with Dr. Paterson, that is expert opinion. And as soon as you get expert opinion, it doesn't get broadcast or it gets banned.
Yes, it's got to go along with the narrative or their agenda, and media shouldn't censor. I think they should basically be able to take any side of any argument and, without fear or favour, put it to air. Let people in the court of public opinion make up their own minds.
They're the ones that pay.
Ultimately, in the end.
Yes, well, they pay for the ABC.
Yeah.
They pay for extra energy costs. They pay for all the quangos associated with energy and all the public servants that are trying to send us bankrupt with the regulation.
Now, let's talk about quangos. I mean, there are so many of them. I mean, I suppose you have to park your ex-politicians somewhere. But, you know, there are weird things like the prickly pear board. And I'm sure they have meetings. What do they talk about? How much does it cost?
They talk about prickly pears, obviously. So
you reckon?
I would love to be on a quango for the volcanic and earthquake danger risk in Australia. You wouldn't have to work hard, and you'd get your sitting fees, and you'd be able to go and enjoy a Canberra winter a couple of times a year. You probably have quarterly meetings, and you could do them by Zoom anyway.
Cucumber sandwiches.
Sandwiches. You'd get an invitation to the Australian Open and maybe the odd Test cricket game. And these quangos are wonderful if you want to swing the lead.
Yeah, it's amazing. And nobody wants to investigate or go down that rabbit hole. I don't see a lot of talk about quangos in the media.
No, and the reason for that is that many of them are hopeful that they will get a seat on a quango.
They don't want to blot the copybook.
Yeah, I think they get paid anything from 50 to 100,000 for 4 meetings a year.
Yes.
And that's just pocket money for a lot of people who are on parliamentary or other pensions.
Yeah.
And it gets them circulating, it gets them the thrill of going to Canberra, and the thrill of Canberra is seeing it in the rear vision mirror.
There's one for the dingo fence, or is it the rabbit-proof fence?
No, there'd be 2 quangos.
The 2 quangos. We need a whole list of them. There was a wonderful politician, and I can't remember his name. He's gone to God now. But he was hot on this. He would ring up quite often and talk about the quangos and what they cost. He knew them chapter and verse, and all the people who sat on them.
I must look them up. This is going to be fun.
Yes. Yeah, that could be good if you could do that for me. I mean, I don't know where you'd start. There's probably a list of them somewhere.
You'd start at the beginning, but it'd take a long while to get to the end.
Yeah, yeah. What do you think about this crazy business with the poor old pharmacy? You know, they're there dispensing health, presumably. They've been told by the government that they're going to be totally responsible for selling vapes. And I still don't understand. There's something that's going to happen in October, but before that, you'll need a prescription, but not after that. And if you're 18, you've got to have a letter from your mother or something. And the Pharmacy Guild was never even spoken to by the government or the Minister for Health. They never even said, well, what are your members, your 4,600 members of the Pharmacy Guild, how are they going to feel about selling vapes when they know they're not good for people's health?
Well, the Pharmacy Guild is a very, very powerful lobby group. I have been to various functions, political functions in Canberra, where they have been sponsored by the Pharmacy Guild. So they're a very, very powerful lobby group, and they're not at all concerned about your health. They're only concerned about the cash flow. Yeah. So it doesn't surprise me.
But isn't it a conflict of interest that pharmacies are dispensing vapes?
We've got these conflicts all the time. For example, the Therapeutic Goods Administration people they're 96% funded by the pharmaceutical industry. So here's the TGA saying that we can or cannot have this drug approved, yet they're not independent. They're funded by the pharmaceutical organisations. So we have these conflicts all the time.
Why do we tolerate them, and what can we do about it?
Well, this requires governments with a bit of courage just to say, well, no, you're not independent. Goodbye. We are going to set up the equivalent of a TGA and we will fund it, and it will be totally and absolutely independent. And this is the case with many medicos. They will get funded to go to a conference in Hawaii, paid for by a pharmaceutical company, and you see it with the stationery and with the literature that they have. And basically it's a mechanism of them giving you a prescription for a certain drug. And the pharmaceutical companies have done their sums. Now, that's right across the board. It's right across the board in every single industry. And it's very, very hard to get an independent opinion. And we got that from Dr. Paterson earlier. But it's very, very hard to get someone who is not conflicted.
We were going to get him on the program this morning, but he's actually travelling, going to Queensland for something. But he's aware that we're on his side and on his case. I'd love to have him talk about this.
Yes, he would add a lot of value to this show.
Yep, good. Wonderful to see you, Professor.
Thank you for having me. I shall now go and watch the Biden-Trump debate.
Apparently it's excruciating. John Bruni just sent me a message saying it's...
Well, whatever Biden's on and whatever they give him, I want some of it.
Hang on, well, I see what John said here. Watching Biden is a painful experience. Trump will win this one. I would not want to be a Democrat.
No, well...
So apparently whatever he's taking is not working terribly well.
Well, it goes for an hour and a half. How long does the drug go for? It might wear off after 60 minutes.
Yeah. Apparently 70 million people are going to watch this in America alone.
Yeah. And I don't think it actually affects which way people vote. People have already made up their mind in the US. They're either not going to vote or they're going to be voting for one or the other. And as a Democrat, I don't know how you could vote for Biden and that laughing jackass.
Yeah. So what do you do? If you were, would you just not vote? You just boycott the election?
No. If I was in the US, I would find ways of having 321 votes, which I'd give to Trump. Because the Democrats do that. So why can't you?
Many accounting machines.
Yeah, I love it. Professor Ian Plimer, ladies and gentlemen.